Welcome. In this session, we will examine the principles of contractual capacity under the Indian Contract Act of 1872. Our specific focus will be on two distinct categories of incompetence: persons of unsound mind and persons who are otherwise disqualified by law from entering into a valid contract.
The central inquiry that will guide our discussion is this: who is legally incompetent to enter into a contract? We will address this question systematically throughout our analysis.
Let us begin with Section 1, Governing Legal Principles. Here, we will lay the statutory and jurisprudential foundation for the doctrine of contractual capacity.
Our topic is situated within the Indian Contract Act of 1872, specifically under Unit 2, which deals with the capacity of the parties. The primary statutory provisions governing this area are Section 11 and Section 12. It is critical to understand from the outset that in India, an agreement with an incompetent person is deemed void ab initio, meaning it is void from its very inception.
We will now turn to the verbatim text of the law. Section 12 of the Act reads as follows: A person is said to be of sound mind for the purpose of making a contract if, at the time when he makes it, he is capable of understanding it and of forming a rational judgment as to its effect upon his interests. This definition establishes a two-part test: first, the capacity to understand the contract, and second, the capacity to form a rational judgment about its effect. The principles we are discussing are buttressed by several foundational legal maxims. The first, Furiosus nulla voluntas est, translates to "a person of unsound mind has no free will." The second, Ultra Vires, means beyond the powers, and is particularly relevant to corporations. Finally, the concept of consensus ad idem, or a meeting of minds, is essential for any valid contract, a state which cannot be achieved with an incompetent party. We shall now proceed to Section 2, where we will conduct a more detailed examination of the legal standard for a sound mind. The law recognizes that a person's mental state can fluctuate. A contract is valid if made during a lucid interval, which is a period of temporary sanity experienced by a person who is usually of unsound mind. Conversely, a person who is ordinarily sane may suffer from temporary incapacity. If an individual is delirious from fever or so intoxicated that they cannot understand the terms of a contract, any agreement made during that state is void. To summarize the essentials of Section 12, two capacities are required: understanding the contract and forming a rational judgment of its effects. It is important to note the limitations. The burden of proof to establish insanity rests upon the party who asserts it. Furthermore, courts give greater weight to medical evidence rather than the mere belief of witnesses. Finally, subsequent insanity does not invalidate a contract that was validly entered into at a prior time. Let us now move to Section 3, Persons Disqualified by Law. This section addresses incompetence arising not from mental state, but from legal status.
Several categories of persons are disqualified by law from contracting. These include alien enemies, who are citizens of a hostile nation, convicts for the duration of their sentence, insolvents until they are formally discharged by the court, foreign sovereigns who possess diplomatic immunity, and corporations, which are limited by the Objects Clause in their founding documents under the doctrine of Ultra Vires. To illustrate these principles, consider these practical scenarios. First, an individual of unsound mind sells property valued at 25,000 rupees for a mere 7,000 rupees. The result is that the sale is void. Second, a person signs a sale deed while so intoxicated they cannot comprehend its terms. The result is that the contract is void as long as the state of intoxication persists. Third, a railway company contracts to build a house, an activity outside its stated objects. The result is that the contract is void under the doctrine of Ultra Vires.
We will now proceed to Section 4, focusing on the application of these principles through an analysis of significant case law.
We examine the case of Inder Singh versus Parmeshwar Hari Singh, reported as AIR 1957 Patna 491. The facts presented were that a person sold property worth $25,000 worth for only $7,000. The legal issue was whether this person was capable of forming a rational judgment as required by Section 12. The court decided that the gross inadequacy of consideration indicated an inability to rationally judge the effect of the contract upon his interests. Therefore, the sale was held to be absolutely void. Next, we consider the landmark English case of Ashbury Railway Carriage and Iron Company Limited versus Rish, cited as 1875 44 LJLZH 185. The facts involve the company whose object was to manufacture railway carriages entering into a contract to finance a railway line. The central issue is whether a contract is valid if it falls beyond the company's stated objects. The House of Lords held that any such contract is ultra vires and, consequently, is void, and cannot be ratified even by the unanimous consent of the shareholders.
We now come to our final section, Section 5, Summary and Revision Tools. This is designed to consolidate your understanding for examination purposes.
To determine contractual capacity, one can follow this logical flowchart. Step 1. Assess the person's mental status under Section 12. If they are of unsound mind, the contract is void unless made during a lucid interval. If sound, proceed to Step 2. Assess their legal status under Section 11. If the person is disqualified as a convict, insolvent, or alien enemy, the contract is void. Step 3. If no disqualification applies under either step, the party is competent to contract.
For revision, you may use the acronym SACID. This stands for soundness of mind, alien enemy, convicts, insolvents, and disqualified by law, which includes the ultra vires doctrine. Remember this critical key point. In India, a contract with a person of unsound mind is void. This is distinct from English law, where such a contract is merely voidable. This is a crucial distinction.
I will conclude with a question for your further reflection. How does the principle of void ab initio protect vulnerable parties while simultaneously impacting the certainty of commercial transactions? Contemplating this question will deepen your understanding of the policy considerations that underpin this area of law.